As our congressional panel takes their seats, we'll have a listen to what the president had to say about stepping up pressure on al-Qaeda in Yemen.
As president, I've made it a priority to strengthen our partnership with the Yemeni government, training and equipping their security forces, sharing intelligence, and working with them to strike al-Qaeda terrorists.
And I'm joined now by the two top senators on the Homeland Security Committee, Independent and Chairman Joe Lieberman, and Republican and Ranking Member Susan Collins. And from California, Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, chair of the House Homeland Security Intelligence Subcommittee. And from Grand Rapids, Michigan, just back from his trip to Yemen, Ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Pete Hoekstra. Welcome to all. And Congressman Hoekstra, let me begin with you since you've just returned from Yemen. What did you learn about specifically the plot against Flight 253, about al-Qaeda, and about the Yemeni government's capacity to fight this fight?
Well, I think we learned a number of things. As John Brennan just said, this is a real threat. This is an imminent threat that is coming from the al-Qaeda Arabian Peninsula area. The second thing that we've learned is that this is kind of a unique threat coming from this group. Why is it unique? It's unique because the core group of al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula is formed by former Gitmo detainees. These are people that were held in Gitmo, have been returned, and have now gone back to the battlefield. The other element there is the influence of a charismatic American radical imam. So you put the Gitmo folks together, you put Alaki together. These people have moved an attack on the U.S. homeland to the top of their priority list. So that is the root cause of why we saw the attack at Fort Hood, why we saw the attack on the Flight 253. The final thing is that, the Yemeni government has limited capacity to deal with returning members from Gitmo and the indigenous al-Qaeda elements in the country. I think that the increased assistance that we are providing to Yemen is absolutely essential. We need this connection between Yemen and America and the Brits if we're going to contain this threat. The good thing about what John Brennan said this morning, it appears that we are now all on the same page. We recognize the imminent threat. We are committed to enhancing our intelligence capabilities and our offensive capability to deal with this. I think the pressing issue that's going to be coming up over the next few months is how do we deal with Americans who have joined al-Qaeda and are now part of the machine that wants to attack the United States.
Homegrown terrorists. It's the new wave. You raised several issues there. Let me stay on Yemen for a moment. Senator Lieberman, last week you said that Yemen could turn into tomorrow's war. Expand on that a little bit. How hot a war are you talking about? Do you foresee American forces? Would you call for American forces in Yemen?
Let me explain the comment. Senator Collins and I, with a few colleagues, were in Yemen in August, and one of our American personnel there said to us, and I thought quite wisely, that Iraq is yesterday's war, Afghanistan is today's war, and if we don't act preemptively, Yemen will be tomorrow's war. We are acting preemptively now. We have an increasing presence there on the ground. We are supporting the Yemeni military and security forces. We've carried out some successful raids in the last couple of weeks against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. What I meant to say was that in part because we have put so much pressure on al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Waziristan, they're moving to Yemen. And it's a big country, very sparsely populated, a government facing two different uprisings in different parts of the country. This is fertile ground for this group to fester in. There have been 3 successful evasions of America's homeland defenses in the last year. The individual in Little Rock who walked in and shot a U.S. Army recruiter, Hassan at Fort Hood, and now Abdul Muttalib in Detroit in the airplane. Every one of those 3 is connected in one way or another to Yemen. So we've got to focus there preemptively, and I'm confident we will.
Well, let's turn to Abdul Muttalib and the Christmas Day terror attack and the administration's response. And let me ask you just straight up, do you have confidence that Janet Napolitano, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, is up to the job, can do this job?
I do, but I will say that her initial comments were bizarre and inappropriate. it baffled me that she said that the system worked very, very smoothly when clearly it did not. It also surprised me when she implied that there was not information to indicate that this individual posed a threat when there was information. Nevertheless, I believe that Secretary Napolitano is working very hard and that she will cooperate with our efforts to ensure that these breaches in our defenses cannot happen again.
She's the right person for the job?
Yes, she came to the job with tremendous experience, federal prosecutor, state attorney general, governor. She's done a good job. I agree with Senator Collins, and I'm sure Secretary Napolitano agrees with us too. The choice of words, some of the choice of words last Sunday were subject to misunderstanding, and they've been badly misunderstood. Senator Collins and I are beginning a series of hearings when Congress and the Senate comes back into session in a couple of weeks to look not just at the Detroit bombing attempt, but at where we are 5 years after the 9/11 Commission reforms went into effect, 7 years after the Department of Homeland Security went into effect. We're going to conduct these on the same bipartisan way that we've done everything at our committee. We're not out to protect anybody or attack anybody. We're out to fix what went wrong on December 25th. And to note that in this year, last year, 2009, our homeland, there were more than a dozen attempts to attack our homeland, and 3 of them broke through. The Detroit bombing could have been the most devastating terrorist attack on the U.S. since 9/11 if the explosive had gone off. So it's time to take a fresh, nonpartisan look, not to knock down the Department of Homeland Security or the 9/11 reforms, but frankly to fix them, build them up, so we learn from our mistakes and we're more secure in the future.
All right. Well, there has been an al-Qaeda surge, it seems. And Congresswoman Harman, let me ask you about that and about what Congressman Hoekstra said about some of the origin of this violence, of these plots coming out of released detainees from the prison at Guantanamo Bay. Would you say to the administration that the time has come, at least temporarily, to stop the release of Yemeni prisoners, of whom there are more than 90 in Guantanamo Bay, back to the chaos and extremism of Yemen?
Well, I have been to Guantanamo Bay 3 times when I was a member of the House Intelligence Committee, I think with Pete Hoekstra on some of those visits, and I am planning a visit soon. I believe the prison should close, but I also believe we should review again where we're going to send the detainees. I think it is a bad time to send the 90 or so Yemenis back to Yemen. I support the administration's actions to open a new prison in Illinois. I hope that happens. I hope Congress will fund it. We do a good job of keeping prisoners, many convicted terrorists, including the shoe bomber Richard Reed, behind bars in the Supermax prison in Colorado. And if we are going to say we live by the rule of law, we have to apply it to those we detain both abroad and in America. Let me add a couple of other things. I think the al-Qaeda threat is different from what it was on 9/11, but I think it is extremely strong, especially in Yemen. I agree with the comments that have already been made. I'm glad the president decided in the last few days to focus more assets on Yemen, but this is a global problem. The Vice President, Joe Biden, is right that we need a global counterterrorism strategy, and as we fix the specific problem that allowed a 23-year-old Nigerian kid with well-hidden explosives and a U.S. visa to board a plane, let's not just fix the last problem. Let's be imaginative and have a layered system that anticipates new problems. And finally, there is a homegrown terror problem in the United States. We have to understand it. We have to work against it more adroitly. We've had a few successes recently with Zazi and Headley and others. Joe Lieberman just mentioned them. But as we do that, I think it is past time for the president to stand up the Privacy and Civil Liberties Board that the 4 of us put in the 2004 Intelligence Reform Act, which is the cornerstone of our effort to fix our intelligence capability. That Civil Liberties Board is responsible for doing something we must do, which is to factor in the protection of our Constitution and law-abiding Americans as we develop new and harder-hitting policies against the bad guys who are trying to attack us both domestically and internationally.
Well, let me ask Congressman Hoekstra about something else Senator Lieberman said, and that is the pace of the al-Qaeda operational tempo this year accelerating, and some missed signals already in the Little Rock recruiting office, essentially. Abdul Makim Mujahid Muhammad, also known as Carlos Bledsoe, he was the subject of an FBI investigation. At the Fort Hood military post, Major Nidal Malik Hassan, of course, also the subject of a federal inquiry. And on Northwest Flight 253, Omar Farouk Abdul Muttalib was also the subject of FBI, of the intelligence community's attention. Congressman Hoekstra, what is happening here 8 years after 9/11, a failure to connect these dots, or is it just, as many terrorism experts say, time that we have to face the fact that maybe we won't be able to stop every potential attack?
Well, I think it's a reality. It's very, very difficult to stop every single attack. It doesn't mean that we should stop trying to improve the mechanisms that we put in place. You know, the four of us worked very closely together to put together the Intelligence Reform Bill back in 2004, which enabled us to make very important strides in improving our defensive and offensive capabilities against al-Qaeda. But al-Qaeda continues to morph into change. And the really striking difference now is the emergence of more Americans as part of this process in al-Qaeda. It means that they do have a higher priority placed on attacking the United States, and they don't need, and they haven't set as a criteria that they want to do something as big as 9/11. They are satisfied with the kind of successes that they saw at Fort Hood and what they anticipated would happen on Christmas Day. I think where we now need to go with intelligence reform, and I think the four of us are probably in agreement. In 2004, we focused on making sure that we were collecting all of the information that we needed to collect. We wanted to make sure that that information would be shared among the community so that we could connect the dots, but that the challenge that we now face is that we are collecting so much information, we are sharing it, we now need to develop the capabilities to do a better job of analysis. We had the dots here, and the problem was that that the systems aren't in place to connect the dots. This is the part of the transformation we still need to see in the intelligence community.
So let me turn actually to the subject of passenger screening, which has been raised. And is it time to profile passengers on the basis of religion or ethnicity, or is that completely contrary to our ideals and our values as Americans?
The problem with profiling is if you take that approach, you're going to miss the Richard Reids, who do not fit the profile. But what we have in this case was a failure to act on a very credible report from the terrorist's father that should, at the very least, have caused the State Department to revoke his visa. To me, that is the biggest question. Why wasn't this individual's visa revoked once we had such a credible report that he posed a threat? That, to me, is an even bigger failure than the failure to screen him effectively. It's also obvious that we need to employ technology better in the screening systems. It is unacceptable that 9 years or 8 years after Richard Reid used the exact same explosive, that we still don't have a system in place that can detect that kind of explosive.
And now that Abdul Muttalib is in custody, Senator Lieberman, should he be brought to trial in federal criminal court?
No, I think that's a very serious mistake. Look, President Obama said yesterday, Abdul Muttalib was trained by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, equipped by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and directed by them to get on that plane and attack the United States of America. That was an act of war. He should be treated as a prisoner of war. He should be held in a military brig. And in fact, he should be questioned now and should have been ever since he was apprehended for intelligence that could help us stop the next attack or get the people in Yemen who directed him to do what he did. So yes, we should follow the rule of law, but the rule of law that is relevant here is the rule of the law of war. And I agree with what Pete Hoekstra said before. I'm one who believes that Guantanamo should not be closed. It is I know it has a bad reputation. I know the president promised during the campaign that he would close it. But the president is in charge of what happens at Guantanamo now, so some of the abuses of the past are not going to happen. You could not find a better, more humane facility when it comes to a detention center in the world. It seems like a waste to me to take these people to Illinois. But one thing we better learn from this case on December 25th, it would be irresponsible to take any of the Yemeni detainees in Guantanamo and send them back to Yemen. We know from past experience that some of them will be back in the fight against us. The leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula broke out of a jail there until we killed him, apparently, in the raid of Christmas week. So we've got a lot to investigate, but I think we've learned a lot already about how to close some of the holes. I believe, incidentally, that we ought to take a look at taking that visa application and admission responsibility from the State Department. It doesn't really fit with foreign policy anymore. And in an age of terrorism, I think the Department of Homeland Security ought to be handling visas abroad. I also think that we ought to be very much tougher about terrorism watch list. If somebody's father comes in and says he may be an extremist, he ought to go on a list that is alerted anytime he approaches as Abdul Muttalib.
That will be part of the president, if you know, no question
Terry?
about it. I just want to turn, Congressman, to the political issue. These disagreements about Guantanamo Bay and the response of the administration raised the political stakes undoubtedly and inevitably in Washington. The former Vice President, Dick Cheney, had this to say in a statement. He said, "We are at war, and when President Obama pretends we aren't, it makes us less safe. Why doesn't he want to admit we are at war? It doesn't fit with the view of the world he brought with him to the Oval Office. It doesn't fit with what seems to be the goal of his presidency, social transformation, the restructuring of American society." Do you think that's an appropriate comment from the former Vice President?
No, I respectfully disagree, and I've been disagreeing with the Vice President for years. I think the label war on terror, which Pete Hoekstra himself has said was a kind of ridiculous label, is a war on a tactic. We're at war with Al-Qaeda, and I think President Obama has been very clear about this from day one and has made a lot of progress against the Al-Qaeda target, as did the Bush administration. The terrorists are not going to check our party registration before they blow us up. I don't think that this Abdul Muttalib young man cared who he blew up on the airplane. I don't think that the Taliban cared who they blew up, sadly, on that volleyball field in West Pakistan recently. And I don't think anybody cared, sadly, that they were harming some wonderfully courageous intelligence agents in the host province of Afghanistan recently. Our hearts go out to their families. But my point is that unless we understand who the enemy is Al-Qaeda, which is a changed organization, a loose horizontal affiliation of bad guys that team with whoever is available. They're very opportunistic, and they have the ability to learn what our vulnerabilities are. Unless we get that and are aggressive against it and protect the civil liberties of Americans while we do it, we won't make progress. Right. So I think the Vice President is off bounds, and I think he has been for a while here.
One more note on politics, Congressman Hoekstra. Once upon a time, there was a tradition of solidarity and refraining from criticizing the president at the time the nation was under attack. 3 days after this attempt to kill 300 people over the skies of Detroit, you sent out a fundraising letter, and I'd like to read a portion of it so our audience gets the full flavor of it. You said, "I have pledged that I will do everything possible to prevent these terrorists from coming to Michigan, but I need your help. If you agree that we need a governor who will stand up to the Obama-Pelosi efforts to weaken our security, please make a most generous contribution of $25, $50, $100, or even $250 to my campaign." Given that tradition that once was part of this country, are you proud of that, of fundraising off of a national crisis like that?
Well, I've been leading on national security for the last 9 years that I've been on the Intelligence Committee. You know, over the last 2 to 3 months, I've been very concerned about where this administration has taken us on national security issues. The refusal to acknowledge that the Fort Hood attack was a terrorist attack.
But I'm asking about raising money off the attempted murder of 300 people 3 days after it occurred.
I am proud of the role that I have played in making sure that America is safe.
And raising money off
I've been right on the facts all along on this, on the recent attacks, the connections with Yemen. The differences between this administration and myself have been purely substantive. They have been policy. I've been trying to drive this administration in a policy direction that keeps America safe. I think if you listen to the language that we have heard over this morning with the guests that you've had on the program, we are now at a point where we have come back. We've got some political disagreements, or policy, excuse me. We've got some policy agreements, but we also have a recognition that this threat is real, it is imminent, and that we need to come together in a bipartisan basis to fix it.
All right.
I am proud of the role that I have played in making sure that this country stays safe.
All right, we will see how
Great.
that
Thank
effort
you.
at bipartisanship goes forward. Welcome, and thank you to you all for joining us this morning.